People think they understand the world just because they've lived in it a long time. But age doesn't give you wisdom automatically. It just gives you more chances to notice the things most folks walk right past. And on that particular Sunday morning, somewhere down in the southern states, I noticed something I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't planning to visit that church. Truth be told, I was just looking for a quiet corner, someplace with shade, maybe a cup of coffee if fate was kind to me. But life has a strange way of sending you exactly where you don't intend to go. Sometimes it pushes you gently. Other times, it drags you by the collar and drops you right in the middle of a story you didn't even know you were part of. I walked past that building twice before deciding to step inside. Maybe it was the sound of the choir weaving through the morning air. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was something deeper calling me in. The same way the ocean calls you even when you don't plan to swim. The place was enormous, bigger than any church I'd ever seen. People were filing in like it was some kind of grand event, smiles everywhere, shining shoes, dresses the color of spring flowers. You could smell perfume and cologne drifting together like they were having their own conversation. And when I stepped inside, I felt something shift. Not in the air, in me. That sanctuary looked more like a performance hall than a house of worship. Lights hung from the ceiling like constellations, sound system set up with enough power to shake the walls of heaven itself. And at the front, a stage so polished it reflected every light that touched it. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, letting the weight of the place settle on me. Think about this for a second. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like the walls themselves were trying to tell you a story? Because that's how it felt. Like the room knew more about the people in it than the people knew about themselves. There's a strange kind of silence that lives underneath all loud places. A silence that whispers if you know how to listen. And beneath all the music, the laughter, the greetings, I heard that silence. It told me something wasn't quite right. Still, I took a seat near the back. I've always liked observing people more than being observed. It gives you time to breathe, time to see the truth in their faces before they cover it with words. The pastor walked out a few minutes later. And he wasn't just any pastor. No, this man was famous. The kind of famous where people know your smile before they know your message. Cameras followed him like trained pets. The crowd clapped before he even spoke. And when he did, well, you'd think honey was dripping from his tongue. He had that charm, that confidence, that glow people mistake for goodness. I listened closely, not to his voice, but to the rhythm underneath it, the pauses, the breaths, the places where sincerity should live. And as he spoke, I felt that uneasy silence return, curling around the edges of the room like a quiet fog. Have you ever looked at someone who speaks beautifully and still felt something missing? Like the words were polished but hollow? I sat there trying to pinpoint what exactly was bothering me. Maybe it was the way he seemed more aware of the cameras than the congregation. Maybe it was the way he smiled too perfectly, like it had been rehearsed in a mirror every morning. Or maybe it was the way the people were looking at him instead of looking toward anything higher. Pause and imagine this. 1,000 faces all staring in the same direction, not with reverence, but with expectation, as if they were waiting to be entertained, not transformed. I closed my eyes for a moment. Sometimes, when you take away one sense, the others sharpen. And when I really listened, I heard something I shouldn't have. Applause for a man, but not a whisper of longing for God. Now, I'm no saint. I've made mistakes tall enough to cast their own shadows. But even I know when a place meant for the soul starts feeling like a theater. And that's when I knew, eventually, I'd have to speak to that man. Not because I wanted to, God knows I didn't, but because life has a way of placing truth inside you like a stone in your shoe. You can ignore it for a while, but sooner or later, you're going to have to stop and pull it out. For the rest of the sermon, I watched him. The crowd laughed on cue, clapped on cue, even nodded on cue. Every moment felt choreographed, like the whole place was performing a dance they didn't even realize they were part of. And sitting there in that sea of perfectly timed reactions, I felt something tighten in my chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't disappointment, it was something quieter, something like sorrow. because I could see it so clearly, thousands of people searching for hope in a building designed to impress, following a man who didn't even realize the weight his voice carried. When the service ended, people rushed toward the exits like it was the end of a concert. I stayed seated, watching, thinking. And that's when the pastor himself walked across the stage, shaking hands, smiling that polished smile, thanking people for coming. I don't know why I stood up. Maybe something nudged me. Maybe something whispered, but I walked right toward him. And when he turned his eyes toward mine, I knew exactly what I was going to say. I also knew he wasn't going to like it. He saw me coming before I reached him. Pastors like him, they're trained to see people approaching, the same way performers learn to read the movement of a crowd. His smile didn't fade, but it changed just a little. The kind of change only a man who's lived long enough would notice. A tightening near the eyes, a flicker of caution, maybe even a hint of annoyance buried deep beneath the shine. But I kept walking. Something inside me, call it instinct, call it conscience, was guiding my steps. That entire room still buzzed with excitement, cameras shutting off, families gathering their things, volunteers rushing to fold chairs and adjust cables. But somehow, in the middle of all that noise, it felt like the air between me and that pastor had gone still, quiet, heavy. When I finally stood in front of him, he extended his hand with that same polished professionalism. "Brother, did you enjoy the service today?" he asked. His voice was warm, but there was a distance hidden underneath, the kind of distance that says, "I don't know you, but I'm obligated to care." I shook his hand, holding his gaze just long enough to let him know I wasn't some casual admirer. And for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, curiosity. Maybe he'd seen one of my films. Maybe he just wasn't used to someone meeting his smile with silence. "It was quite a sight," I said, "quite a performance." His smile twitched. Only for a second, but in that second, I saw the truth pushing against the surface. He wasn't used to being spoken to plainly. Most people complimented him before they even knew why. But I wasn't there to flatter him. And deep down, I think he sensed it. "Performance?" he repeated, still smiling, but with just enough tightness around the edges to reveal the crack forming. "Well, we try to make the service meaningful." "Meaningful is one thing," I said softly. "Entertaining is another. Have you ever felt a room grow colder even when the temperature doesn't change?" That's what happened right then. He tilted his head just slightly, his eyes narrowing, still trying to maintain that pastor's charm, but charm is a fragile thing. It doesn't survive direct truth very well. "What exactly are you trying to say?" he asked. There it was, the shift, the shine slipping, the man behind the smile finally stepping forward. I took a slow breath. I wasn't there to embarrass him. I wasn't there to argue. I was there because something inside me had been stirring ever since I walked through those enormous doors. "I'm saying," I replied, "that I watched a congregation applaud you louder than they prayed. I watched people walk in hungry for hope and leave impressed by lighting cues." His jaw tightened just a little, mostly invisible to anyone else, but not to me. You see, when someone spends their whole life being praised, they forget how to handle anything else. "And you think that's my fault?" he asked. He didn't say it with anger, not yet. It was something else, something like defensiveness wrapped in politeness. That's a dangerous combination. "I think," I said, "that a shepherd shouldn't look more polished than the flock." That was when his eyes sharpened, not wildly, not dramatically, just enough to let me know I'd touched a nerve he kept guarded. "Brother," he said, lowering his voice, "people come here because they're looking for inspiration. They're looking for excellence. We give God our best." I nodded slowly. "But are you giving him your best, or giving the people what keeps them entertained?" He paused, a long pause, long enough for the volunteers nearby to glance over, sensing the tension. But let me tell you something. Truth has a density to it. When it enters the air, people feel it before they understand it. And he felt it standing there in that shining temple built to impress. For the first time since I walked up to him, his smile faded completely. What replaced it wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something closer to exposure, like a man standing in sunlight after hiding in shadows for too long. You don't know what it takes to run a church of this size, he said quietly. You don't know the pressure. I nodded. Maybe I don't. But I do know what it looks like when someone carries weight they weren't meant to carry alone. I leaned in just a little, not threateningly, but gently, like someone offering truth with both hands. You've built a church, I said, but somewhere along the way, you started building a brand too, and brands demand a different kind of worship. He stepped back slightly, barely noticeable. But again, I saw it, that invisible shield rising between us. I think you've misunderstood what we're doing here, he said. I think you came in with a judgment already in your mind. I almost smiled at that, not out of mockery, but out of the quiet sorrow that grows when someone mistakes concern for criticism. I didn't come to judge, I said softly. I came to listen. But what I heard wasn't the voice of a shepherd guiding his flock. It was the voice of a man guiding his audience. His jaw clenched, this time visibly. Who are you, he asked, to walk into my church and tell me something like that? I looked at him, really looked, past the fame, past the lights reflecting off his expensive shoes, past the rehearsed warmth. I'm someone, I said, who's lived long enough to recognize when a man is losing himself, even while the world praises him for it. Silence fell between us, heavy, pressing. He didn't like what I'd said, no, not one bit. But anger only comes quickly when truth hits too close to home. And the truth was standing right there, quietly, patiently, waiting for him to face it. But he wasn't ready yet, not even close. For a moment, I thought he might walk away. Men in his position usually do. They surround themselves with people who nod at every word, who protect them from anything that sounds like honesty. Truth becomes a stranger to them, an unwelcome visitor they never quite know how to handle. But instead of walking off, he folded his arms and pressed his lips together, studying me like a man trying to decide whether the person in front of him was a threat or a mirror. Around us, the sanctuary was slowly emptying out, the footsteps of hundreds echoing like distant waves. The stage lights dimmed one by one, the grand machinery of performance settling into silence. And there he stood, famous, respected, adored, yet for the first time that morning, he looked small, tired, maybe even a little scared. You don't know what it's like, he finally whispered. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. Thousands of people expecting you to be strong every single day, expecting you to have answers, expecting you to be perfect. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I understood. The world has a cruel habit of placing crowns on men who haven't learned how to carry them, and sooner or later, the weight begins to crush something inside. Perfection isn't what they need from you, I said softly, but honesty, they might just live off that. He shook his head, frustration returning to his face like a tide rolling back in. If I show weakness, they'll lose faith. They'll think I'm not called for this. Called? I murmured. That's a heavy word. He looked up at me sharply. You don't believe I'm called? I believe, I said, that too many men mistake applause for calling, and they don't realize the difference until the applause stops. He stared at me, eyes narrowing, chest rising and falling just a little faster, but beneath all that, I saw something breaking loose. A crack in the armor, a tremor in the image he'd spent years perfecting. You think you know me, he said quietly. You think you know what this church means. I shook my head. No, I think you've forgotten what it means. There's a difference. He looked away, jaw tightening again, this time not from anger, but from something far more dangerous, fear. The fear a man feels when truth finally catches up to him, because truth is patient like that. It waits in the shadows for the day you run out of places to hide. When I started preaching, he said slowly, I wanted to help people. I wanted to inspire them. But as the church grew, things got complicated. There were expectations, sponsors, donors, departments, cameras, staff, budgets. He shook his head, voice tightening. People don't realize how lonely this position is. Lonely, I repeated. That's a word most people wouldn't associate with a man who has thousands listening to him every week. Exactly, he whispered. They think you're surrounded by love, but they don't know the difference between love and admiration. Admiration fades, love stays. I don't know who really loves me anymore. There it was. The quiet confession he didn't even know he was making. And once it slipped out, he seemed almost startled by it, as if he hadn't meant to let that truth escape. Have you ever felt this way? He asked suddenly, lifting his eyes to mine like a drowning man searching for something solid to hold on to. I breathed in slowly. Everybody who stands on a stage, I said, eventually learns the same truth. Applause can fill a room, but it can hollow out your soul if you're not careful. He blinked, absorbing that, letting it settle into the places he'd been avoiding. I could feel the weight in his silence. The heaviness of a man who'd been carrying his image for so long, he forgot it wasn't actually him. But why tell me this? He asked finally. Why confront me? You don't even know me. Because, I said gently, your soul is showing. And most people here are too dazzled by the lights to notice. He swallowed, a small tremor in his throat, giving away just how deeply the words had landed. You think I'm losing myself. I think, I said, you're losing the part of yourself that mattered most. The part that was called, the part that didn't care for lights or applause or cameras. He exhaled shakily, the wall around him crumbling by the inch. Then he said something that hit me harder than I expected. I had a dream 2 nights ago, a strange dream. I waited. Dreams have a way of revealing what waking minds refuse to face. I was preaching, he said, but the sanctuary was empty. No seats, no lights, no screens, just me, alone. And every time I tried to speak, the words came out hollow, echoing off walls that weren't there. He shook his head. I woke up sweating. I didn't know what it meant. I looked at him, really looked. It meant, I said quietly, that even you can feel the difference between speaking from your soul and speaking from your stage. The moment I said it, something inside him cracked. Not shattered, but cracked, like a shell splitting open. His shoulders slumped, his eyes glistened with something he wasn't ready to call emotion. And for the first time, he wasn't the famous pastor in front of me. He wasn't the celebrity preacher. He wasn't the polished performer. He was just a man, a tired man, a lost man, searching for a way back to something he'd abandoned without realizing it. But that awesome was when the real truth began forming inside me. The truth I hadn't said yet, the truth he wasn't prepared for, the truth that would make him angry in a way he wouldn't forget. He stood there waiting for my answer, as if the right set of words could stitch together everything that had come undone inside him. The sanctuary was almost empty now, just a faint hum of electricity settling into silence, just the dying glow of the stage lights ticking out one by one. It felt like the whole building was holding its breath, waiting for the thing that needed to be said. And he watched me with the eyes of a man who'd been brave enough to confess the storm inside him, but not brave enough to face the thunder that came next. I stepped a little closer, not out of confrontation, but compassion, and said, "Do you really want the truth?" His jaw tightened, his breathing steadied. Yes, but his eyes said he wasn't ready. Truth is like cold water. A man can say he's ready to jump, but when his toes touch the surface, he flinches. Still, he asked. So I spoke. You're not leading a church anymore, I said quietly. You're managing an audience. He blinked. Once, slowly, as if the words didn't make sense at first. So I continued. People come here looking for the presence of God, I said, but you've given them the performance of you. And no matter how polished the lights, how loud the music, how beautiful the stage, a performance can't feed a starving soul. For a second, I thought he might interrupt, tell me I was wrong, tell me I didn't understand, but he didn't. He just swallowed hard and listened, the tremor in his breath growing more visible. When a man becomes the center of his own ministry, I added softly, God quietly steps aside, and the people start worshiping the shadow instead of the source. His face tightened. not in anger this time, but in pain. A deep, slow pain, like a wound long ignored, finally waking up. You think I've become some kind of idol? He whispered. I said, some people here can't tell the difference between your voice and God's anymore, and that should terrify you. He looked away fast, breathing sharp, the truth slicing through that polished exterior he'd spent years perfecting. You don't know what kind of pressure I'm under, he said, his voice trembling. You don't know what it's like to have people expect miracles from you. You're right, I said. I don't know that pressure. But I do know this. When a man tries to replace the weight of God's presence with the weight of people's expectations, he ends up crushed either way. He closed his eyes, fighting something inside himself, fighting the urge to defend, fighting the urge to break, fighting the urge to admit I was right. So what are you saying? He asked finally, voice raw. That I'm a fraud? No, I said gently. I'm saying you're a man who's forgotten what he was called to do. You're not a fraud, you're just lost. And the worst part is, the more successful you became, the more lost you got. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, they were wet. But people are being helped, he argued softly. Lives are being changed. Some, I nodded, but not because of you. Because God is bigger than your stage, bigger than your sermons, bigger than your reputation. But that doesn't mean he's pleased. His lips parted at that, a quiet shock, a sting he hadn't expected. I took a slow breath and delivered the part I knew would hit deepest. Do you want to know the truth that made me speak to you today? He didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. I saw something, I said, something that scared me. When you stood on that stage earlier, your voice was strong, but your spirit was thin. The room was full, but you weren't. The people were raised high, but you were sinking. His eyes widened slightly. Sinking? Yes, I whispered. Into yourself, into your image, into the version of you that the world built, not the one God called. He looked as if the ground beneath him shifted. And then came the moment I had saved for last, the one truth no pastor famous or forgotten ever wants to hear. So I said it slowly, quietly, clear enough to echo through him for years. Your church, I said, has grown bigger than your soul can carry. He stiffened, the color left his face, and in that instant, the anger finally came. Not rage, not shouting, just a cold, sharp anger born from a truth too heavy to accept. You don't understand, he said, voice shaking. I built this from nothing. That's the problem, I replied. You think you built it. You think it's yours. And the moment a man thinks God's work belongs to him, he has already fallen. The anger in his eyes flickered just for a breath into fear. Deep, paralyzing fear, the kind a man feels when he realizes he's standing at the edge of a cliff he didn't know he was walking toward. He turned away from me, running his hand across his face, his breath unsteady. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Not accusatory, not hostile, just broken. Because someone needed to, I said. Because the people around you love the image of you too much to protect the soul of you. And because somewhere inside, you already know everything I said is true. He sank onto one of the front row seats, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, and for a long moment, he just breathed slow, shaky breaths of a man finally realizing how far he drifted. I sat beside him quietly, no preaching, no lecturing, just presence. Sometimes truth doesn't need an echo. It just needs a place to land. After a while, he lifted his head. His eyes looked older, but clearer. What am I supposed to do now? He whispered. I looked at him, really looked, and said, the only thing worth saying. Go back, I murmured, not to the stage, but to the one who called you. Find the part of you that knew how to kneel before you ever learned how to stand on a platform. He swallowed, a tear slipping down his cheek, and in a voice barely above a breath, he said, I'm scared. Good, I whispered. If you weren't scared, I'd be worried. Fear means you're finally waking up. The sanctuary was almost completely dark now. Just one lonely light glowing above the stage, flickering like a dying candle. And as we sat there in that cavernous silence, I realized something. Even the strongest men need to break sometimes just to find what's real again. As I stood to leave, he reached out and gently touched my arm. "Thank you," he said, not as a pastor, not as a public figure, but as a man finally ready to face the truth. I nodded once, turned toward the doors, and walked into the cool night air. And as the church faded behind me, one thought stayed with me, soft, steady, and honest. Even the greatest buildings fall when the foundation forgets why it was built, and sometimes God sends a stranger to remind the builder